Hello and welcome to the Final Frontiersmen, a YouTube channel about all things Trek with a heavy focus on the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game. I'm Bill, and today we are going back to one of the earliest source books of the Star Trek Adventures line, now first edition lineup, and we are going to review the Beta Quadrant Sourcebook. It's an older book, but there's still a lot that you could get out of it. As with all of our reviews, we are using the alert system. First, yellow alerts for things that we think you should take note of. It might be of interest to you. Red alerts for the things that we really like. And the rarely used black alerts for anything that might be groundbreaking and just brand new for the series. So without further ado, let me jump into the small window and let's talk about the Beta Quadrant Sourcebook. Jumping into chapter 2, because chapter 1 is just an introduction of what to find in the book. Chapter 2, I'm going to start off with a red alert. The reason being is this is the chapter where it's talking all about what's in the Beta Quadrant. And this is going to be a very, in my opinion, a very indispensable resource for GMs and players out there, especially players who maybe aren't fully up to their knowledge on Star Trek and Star Trek lore. The Beta Quadrant Sourcebook is the sourcebook that contains all the big names that you associate with Star Trek, especially traditional Star Trek. So in this chapter, it's going to talk about the United Federation of Planets, the Klingon Empire, and the Romulan Empire, as well as a few others. Like I said, the big names, and especially the big three. So this is going to be your one-stop shop for referencing what is traditionally viewed as the Star Trek universe. The places, locations, and the peoples that we commonly, and probably the general public at large, commonly associate with Star Trek. So we start off with the United Federation of Planets. And some of you might be saying, like, wait a minute, I thought Earth was in the Alpha Quadrant. Why are we talking about United Federation planets in the Beta Quadrant? It also talks about that in the book here. There's a sidebar about that. United Federation planets, as I think many Trekkies know, it spans both the Beta and Alpha Quadrants. It's right on the border. Earth is in the Alpha Quadrant, traditionally. According to Star Trek maps and that, but because the UFP, the Federation, is in both quadrants, and the other two big names, Klingon and Romulan, are both in the Beta Quadrant, Modiphius decided to just include all of the Federation along with Klingon and Romulan, so you get the big three all in one book. You don't have to jump back and forth referencing those main three polities of Star Trek. That's why we're starting off with the United Federation of Planets. And this pattern for the UFP is going to be repeated when we get to the Klingons, when Romulans, and so on. But it's going to go into great detail about the makeup of the society, the structure of the society of the Federation. So it talks about astrocartography, the political structure, on different agencies in the Federation, Starfleet culture, economy, which is always a very big topic that pops up time and time again online. How does the economy work in Star Trek? Because we see them in Deep Space Nine using gold-pressed latinum, using currency, but Star Trek Federation is always saying they no longer use currency. They no longer use money. So this does have a sidebar explaining how the economy works in this type of situation, technology, just so on. All of that information that pertains to, it's like an encyclopedia entry of what it's like to be in the United Federation of Planets. There are a ton of sidebars, and the in-universe sidebars, which of course appear through all of the different source books that Modiphius has put out, but in these early books especially, they go very heavy. There's a lot of those personal logs, transmissions, communication, in-universe written sidebars from the perspective of a character in the Star Trek universe. And I really love it because They're dripping with theme. They're great to mine for ideas and inspiration to take out for your own stories. These early books, like I said, especially, are full of these kind of sidebars, and there's a lot of really useful world building information in there. You're just not getting it in a dry encyclopedic sort of way. You're getting it through the perspective of a character in the universe. The next part of this section, it will go into the different Federation worlds. The worlds covered in this book are Andoria, Benzar, Earth, and Vulcan. So for the big ones, you'll get a lot of information about the planets, the worlds, what it's like, the culture on those planets. After going through the worlds, that's when we move into the Klingon Empire. And this, before the Klingon core rulebook, and also in addition to it, but especially before the Klingon core rulebook came out, this was the great resource for the Klingon Empire. It talks about the history of the Empire. There's lots of sidebars talking about the Code of Kahless, the Klingon marriage ceremonies, and just so many more aspects of Klingon culture. Then, I think one very good sidebar is about how to detect a cloaked vessel, which is quite a big deal in Star Trek, and I think a lot of players would have questions about how do they do that, especially again if they're not very familiar with the ins and outs of the technobabble of Star Trek. So that's nice. And then, same as with the Federation, you're going through all the different aspects of that culture of the Klingon Empire, and then it goes into the different worlds of the Klingon Empire. So you have Kronos, the Klingon homeworld, Borath, Khitomer, Narendra 3, Rura Penthe, and Tai Gokor, which the name I didn't recognize at first. But you have those planets where, again, it will give you a nice entry about what those worlds, those key worlds of the Empire are like. Next section is now the Romulan Empire. So, same pattern. Romulans are a lot more secretive, so there's not too much information, but this is going to be your biggest source currently, as far as I remember, of the Romulan Empire in Star Trek Adventures. So you could go in there and learn about just how their history is, their interactions with the Federation through the early days of the Federation, the war, and then Tal Shiar, all of that espionage, secrecy type stuff that the Romulans are known for. This is the best resource you could have. Again, when you're paired together with the Federation, with the Klingon, you have this all in one book. That's what makes this such a great resource. Even now, even at this late stage in first edition, and the style of the STA books has evolved over the years, the quality of the layout, the content, presentation has all improved over the years, but what hasn't changed is the level of detail and quality found in these early books. They are the same level of quality that we find in the later books. It's just a more primitive version. So having this reference for the biggest names in the Star Trek polities in that galaxy makes the Beta Quadrant Sourcebook a very key addition to most STA libraries, in my opinion. Same thing, it goes into Romulan worlds, Romulus and Remus. It goes into some Romulan, just other details about the society. But like I said, I don't expect a whole lot more than what we already know, because the Romulans don't really share their stuff. And that's why Jim Johnson says there's not enough to make a Romulan core rulebook like there is with the Klingon Empire. So you're going to get what they have, and it's a good resource. After that, other groups that are included in this chapter, you have the Orion Syndicate, including there is a sidebar that I recommend you check out in that section. It's a Starfleet Academy joke about the Orions, which I found very interesting. The Gorn hegemony. I can speak English, I promise you. But that's all chapter 2. All those big names of the Beta Quadrant, but very big names in Star Trek lore. And especially with the Gorn, they are having a comeback with Strange New Worlds. expect more if a Strange New World sourcebook ever comes out, ever gets released. But for now, if you're interested, if you want to use them in your game, this is the sourcebook for you. So standing down, red alert, going into chapter 3. Chapter 3 is the species of the Beta Quadrant, and this gives you a lot of new life path options for character creations. 13 new species, in fact. You have the Ardenon, Benzite, Bolian, Ephrogian, Klingon, Rigelian Chelon, and Rigelian Jelna, 2 different types, Rycian, and then the 4 different types of Zindi, the Zindi Arboreal, the Primate, Reptilian, Insectoid, and last, you have the Zakdorn, not related to Michael Dorn. And that is chapter 3. Chapter 4, now we go into the starships. So starships will not have really a lot of Federation ships because the main core book was all about Federation ships, and then the command source book also added a lot more Federation ships. So instead, you're getting ships of the polities that are solely Beta Quadrant. So this has Klingon starships. And again, that came out later again with the Klingon core rulebook, but this is an earlier book. So with the Klingons, you have the D5 battlecruiser, the Raptor scout, the Katinga battlecruiser, and the Negvar warship. Romulan starships give you a 22nd century bird of prey and a scout ship. Orions, you get a nice selection. Orion Scout Ship, Orion Interceptor, Orion Blackguards, and the Pleasure Barge. So if you want to incorporate Orions in your game, again, Beta Quadrant, that's where it's at. Then it even has some Gorn starships. What do we have? We have the Gorn Raider, the Gorn, how would you say that? Varanus battleship? I don't know exactly how to pronounce that. I'm not sure the right name for it. But 2 different types of Gorn vessels. Again, if we ever get a Strange New Worlds book, I'm sure we're going to get a lot more. And there are even civilian starships, which, if you combine it with the player's guide, which allows you to play non-Starfleet characters, any kind of civilian, non-aligned people, this will come in handy for that. So for civilian starships, this gives you stats on freighters, transports, colony ships, survey ships, and even Vulcan Science Academy survey vessels. The last chapter, yes, we're already at the end. Can you believe it? Last chapter is Encounters and Adversaries. And I'm giving this a yellow alert because this is very interesting. And going back and rereading this old source book, I was reminded now at this stage, it makes more sense. I'm reminded of something that was kind of new at the time, kind of different at the time. But normally in these source books, you have the Encounters and Adversaries section where it gives you some maybe plot components and some NPCs. This still has NPCs, but it has it split into sections. So the first one is Romulan Neutral Zone, and it will give you some NPCs. But what it does, interestingly enough, that I have forgotten, it gives you encounter seeds of different kinds of adventures that might pop up in the Romulan Neutral Zone. And this reminds me of what basically mission briefs are now. So this was like the prototype, the beta version of what eventually became mission briefs, which I believe debuted in the Klingon core rulebook. Don't quote me on that. So it gives you not just the NPCs and things that relate to that region of space, but a lot of just little story hooks and ideas to sprinkle in or take and expand upon. So I thought, yeah, that's very cool. These are like having a very primitive, basic first draft version of mission briefs. And they have it for Romulan Neutral Zone, then the Briar Patch, of course, also in Beta Quadrant, Klingon Border, and even the Shackleton Expanse, because this was before the Shackleton Expanse, what was campaign guide. The Living campaign was going on during this time that Modiphius ran before the Shackleton Expanse campaign book was released. But this is pre-Shackleton campaign, while the Living campaign was in its early stages. And this gives you potential adversaries for Shackleton Expanse. And you can use this section as more ideas for Shackleton Expanse campaign, or to just flesh it out more with a little more detail that appear here. So it's still a good resource for it if you're going into the main campaign itself, or you just want to use some ideas quickly from it without flipping through the giant tome that is the campaign book. There are some great ideas to take from this book. And as short as it is, there's a lot packed into here. So that is really the end of this review. Again, it's an older source book. They changed the style, the way they present things, and just how they streamlined the system since these early days, but you're still getting the same level of quality that you find throughout all of the STA line. But like I said, what I think is the key point of this book and why I love this book, why it's one of the best source books in the game, is simply the reference material you have for all the familiar, known, and famous elements of the Star Trek galaxy. I've said many times to a lot of people when talking, Star Trek Adventures to me is filling the role for Star Trek that the West End games Star Wars source books did for the Star Wars universe way back in the late 80s, early 90s, before the prequels came out, when there wasn't much, where there were just a few novels trickling out. Those West End games books basically created the expanded universe and built the entire vision of what Star Wars was in the minds of the fans when we only had the 3 movies to go on back then. And Star Trek Adventures is kind of filling that role now for Star Trek in just how detailed and useful their books are, not just to run the game, but as reference material, as resource material to just read and learn and understand and just expand your knowledge on the Star Trek universe. And this book is probably one of the high points of these resources that Modiphius has put out. So I love the Beta Quadrant source book. It's full of a lot of detail that, yes, a lot of it is reprinted later or it can be accessed through other means, but the actual content about the Beta Quadrant itself is pure gold. Highly recommend it, at least for a single read. Check it out if you get the chance. They're kind of hard to find these days, but if you can find these Quadrant source books, by all means, check it out, especially Beta Quadrant. So thank you very much for watching. As usual, please comment below if there's any comment, any kind of feedback, any idea, anything I skipped over. Please point that out to me, or let's just have a conversation. But as always, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Be safe out there, my friends. Live long and prosper. Peace and long life. Take care.